We ended the first lecture on Descartes' meditations at the end of the second meditation with Descartes' contemplation of that piece of wax. In this second lecture on the meditations, we're going to pick up at the beginning of the third meditation and see how Descartes traces out the implications of that experiment, that thought experiment with that piece of wax. So we'll start off by articulating a sort of idealism, a sort of picture of an epistemic original position, how it is that Descartes feels he has found himself with regard to what he once thought were the objects of the external world and the sensations thereof. So we're going to articulate with Descartes what we basically think of as the skeptical world view. From there, Descartes is going to try and overcome his skepticism about the external world. And to do so, he's going to specify or articulate a positive version of that justification principle that we saw in the first meditation. Recall the first meditations, the principle talked about the conditions where we had to withhold our assent, not believe. Now he wants to articulate a version of the principle that is positive in nature, that tells us when we can believe. So even after articulating that principle, the first thing that arises is problems. So the first problem that he'll think about is whether or not he's actually ever in a position to know things about the world, even when he is certain in his judgments, even when his judgments are, as he likes to call them, clear and distinct. Would that, in fact, guarantee their truth against the backdrop of this skeptical argument, this evil demon scenario? Then he'll turn to contemplating how his judgments about the objects of the external world, about his sensory experiences, more often than not lack that kind of certainty, that they don't even have the kind of certainty that one would associate with the sorts of rational intuitions that cogito ergo sum expresses. Descartes then articulates a principle in terms of what he calls the natural light. And he'll talk about the natural light, clear and distinct judgments, and certainty largely interchangeably. And there's basically what he's referring to as rational intuition, his ability to judge things in a way where they are clear and distinct, where they are certain and undeniable. Now, in the face of these problems for his positive justification principle, he's going to give a pragmatic justification of the natural light. Essentially, he's not going to try and show that the natural light is immune from skeptical concerns, but that he has no other means of calling its pronouncements into question that have a better epistemic pedigree than the natural light itself. Even so, he will note that his judgments about objects in the external world are not the sorts of things that emanate in his mind from the natural light. They're not the sort of clear and distinct, undeniable, absolutely certain judgments that he associates or uses to characterize this notion of the natural light. So in order for him to continue with this project, in order for him to get a knowledge of the external world, he needs some means to bridge the ideas that are manifestations of his own mind and the world, that is, these external objects that are the purported causes of them. And so what he's really going to be looking for is some means of guaranteeing that his judgments about his sensory experiences are in fact the sorts of things that are true. And so he'll offer us a proof of the existence of God, where God, being perfect in the medieval terminology, cannot lie, would never deceive, and hence the judgments would have to be good judgments. So we'll go through Descartes' proof of God's existence in that third meditation. He gives another proof in the fifth meditation, which we won't consider, and we won't really criticize his proof of the existence of God directly, because we'll pick that up in the final lecture module in week 6 when we talk about rational evaluation of the belief in the existence of a monotheistic deity. So as we begin the third meditation, Descartes sort of makes concrete this notion of his skeptical worldview that results from that negative project and against which he must fight in order to establish his new knowledge edifice. And so remember, in the second meditation, he ends it by contemplating that wax and concluding that his judgments regarding external objects don't actually emanate from the objects, but from the understanding alone. It's not the sensory properties, it's the understanding from which we make that association between the sensory properties of the wax and the fact that it is the wax. In the third meditation, he wants to refine this view and attempt to provide an epistemic basis through which the understanding could come to know external objects and their properties, despite the fact that the understanding is only making judgments about manifestations, alterations of his own mind, and those may or may not have any connection to an external world. So he crafts this view that his ideas are modifications of his own thought, and that the ideas that he formally associated with the external world, they are different from other ideas that he has in that they come to him independently of his own will. So he doesn't will them to come. It's not a series of ideas that come to him as a result of a train of thought. They are things that sort of happen to him. They come to him regardless of whether he wants them to or doesn't. So open your eyes and you get a bunch of sensory experiences. You don't choose what you see directly. You can only manipulate that indirectly. So because the meditations is sort of abstract, and because it can sort of seem like an episode from the Twilight Zone, I try to throw in what passes for a little bit of humor in this class in the slides. And I won't play it up. If you find it distracting, just do your best to ignore it. So in Meditation 3, paragraph 6, Descartes starts to craft this picture of the basic skeptical worldview. He says that he realizes now that he doesn't know the source of his ideas of the external world. They might come from himself or from something external. All he knows is that they come to him independent of his own will. He also doesn't know if the source is external, that is, if it's not him that's the cause of these ideas of experience, whether those internal modifications of thought, those ideas, are veridical, that is, as he expresses it in paragraph 6, have a similarity or conformity to the things outside of him. So we'll pick this up in the second lecture module.